substitute for Senate Bill 269, the Budget Bill, third.
Senator from Jackson moves Senate refuse to concur in House amendments to Senate Bill 597. All those in favor will say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have. Declare the motion adopted. The clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Bills on third reading.
Engrossed committee substitute for Senate Bill 269, the Budget Bill, third reading of the bill.
Are there amendments? Questions on passage of the bill? Is there discussion? Senior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just make a few brief comments. When we began the year, there were lower collections for the current fiscal year, projected to be $354 million below for this fiscal year, and the proposed budget, that addressed the $466 million gap, with assumption that the legislature would pass some legislation was given to us. So today we're going to talk about not the 16 problem, we're actually looking at the 2017 budget bill. We were able to balance our general revenue budget by the actions of the Finance Committee and the Senate. The total amount of general revenue in the committee substitute is $4.3 billion and change. This budget is not balanced by or does not rely upon or include funds from the Revenue Shortfall Reserve Fund at all. The Senate passed several revenue measures, including tobacco tax, durable medical goods, stopping workers' compensation, old fund distributions, among a few others. We also incorporated nearly every one of the governor's recommended budget reductions for fiscal year 2017, which, let me check with Michael. The budget reductions were about $250 million, and did little to restore any of those cuts to those agencies that were included in his recommended budget, with a couple of exceptions. Our bill did increase appropriations to Cedar Lakes and the state police, and for funding for the Division of Protective Services, basically to take care of our new security entrances that are at the building. It's very important to note that each of the agencies appeared before the Finance Committee. They all came. That's why we have those budget hearings, and provided information about the programs and services they provide, as well as the budget issues facing them. Each agency indicated they could live within the appropriations recommended by the governor. However, a number of them indicated that any additional cuts in their operating budget could be devastating. So when working on this committee substitute for Senate Bill 269, we set out to try to do nothing more than to maintain the current programs and service levels without having to incorporate any additional cuts, either across the board or targeted, all the while also trying to generate ongoing revenue measures to maintain the budget, as opposed to one-time sources like the Revenue Shortfall Reserve Fund. We realized that some of the measures we were successful in passing could be more difficult to pass in the House of Delegates, but wanted to maintain a position of maintaining funding at levels recommended to and by the governor. As you look through the document, you'll notice that many line items of appropriation changes are very small, with the exception of items that I mentioned earlier. All the differences are resulting from adjustments to the retirement system and moving PIA from its placeholder in the government's budget bill. On page 27, Fund 0200 for $43,457,151. That was the PIA funding that was on that line on page 27 that I did point out one afternoon or morning from the floor. You do not see that line in the budget because each of the agencies' personnel lines now reflect that money spread to them appropriately based upon the premiums that will be collected or paid out of the salary lines, out of those personnel lines. Just by way of note, I think as you look inside the general revenue budget, it's about $330 million or $40 million, something like that, that goes for PIA premiums right now. So this 43 was added to all of that. So when you compare the committee substitute to the introduced version, the number on that line is now 0. It's gone, but it's been distributed to each agency as required. And that's how it was that because the governor put that line in the budget that, quote, PIA had been brought to the level of that many of our citizens were concerned about, and it's funded in the budget it's funded in the budget that way. Once the revenues were established by our actions, we began assembling the general revenue portion of the budget, and after adjustments were made to PIA and PERS and other expenditures adjustment, a large portion of which were in education and school aid formula. But when we didn't pass Senate Bill 452, we were made to reflect other areas of change. So the Senate budget was over the available amount of general revenue in by $21 million that would have been captured in that bill that did not pass. To balance general revenue, Medicaid was reduced by that amount and moved it to the excess lottery portion of the budget bill. Excess lottery was able to absorb an additional cost of the two measures that affected excess lottery. Senate Bill 116 generated $4.2 million, and Senate Bill 641 generated $21.2 million. I would like to mention that the Senate's own operating budget has changed over the last couple years. Last year, the Senate operating budget was reduced by $500,000. The Senate budget includes another reduction for 2017 in the amount of $930,000 for a total appropriation of $5,022,000. Further, the Senate has agreed to participate in the governor's 4% cut, Executive Order 7-15, with an additional reduction of $238,000 to offset the 2016 revenue shortfall. And the Senate, through language in this bill, it's important, it's not in the line you see, the $5 million line, but below it, the Senate, through language in this bill, increased its commitment to $2.5 million for fiscal year 2016. So we've taken some of our Senate reappropriated money and have put it in for the 2016 problem. And we've also taken an additional $5 million out of our reappropriated money and put it in the language of the bill to contribute to the 2017 problem. Once this bill goes to conference and legislation has been completed, we'll have a better idea of what revenues are available for the 2017 budget, and we'll work accordingly. Absent some additional revenue measures passed by the House, we will most likely end up using multiple sources of one-time funding, which could include the Revenue Shortfall Reserve Fund or whatever. So that's where we stand, and that's the Senate's budget, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I urge passage of the bill.
Questions on passage of the bill? Is there discussion? Senior Senator from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Senior Senator from the 4th yield?
Senator yields.
Yes.
Thank you. On this 58th day, would you consider this one of the most important pieces of legislation that we are required to pass during a legislative session, right?
Not only important, I think it's constitutionally required that we leave here eventually this year with a balanced budget. Not necessarily, as you know, we can go on and have other sessions, but yes, it is. We have to deal with this. Yeah.
So this is the most important in the sense of all other legislation would be secondary to the budget.
I think you're right. If we assemble as a legislature and do nothing else, we must do this.
Now, I guess my question, and you covered it, but I want to make it clear or to be understanding of this. The structural changes. There's been some criticism out in the media in the sense of this one-time money, and have we moved forward in the area of structural changes? And you referred to the governor's budget. When the governor presented the budget, he had recommendations for structural changes, did he not?
I guess we could argue that. To me, the purest way for him to give us a budget is that we don't have to pass several measures. You know, budgets I've seen in the past, you know, the governor says, here's the revenue and here's the expenditures, and usually you're just getting a little hassle over the expenditures. But what we've been given for the past 2 years is a revenue with estimates at $4.3 billion approximately. But when you dig into it, the actual tax collections, the general revenue taxes, are about $200 million below. So basically, the governor has generated $200 million in his revenue estimates by giving his state of the state and telling us that he gives us a revenue estimate based upon we passing certain measures, which this body did. We passed a tobacco tax. Now, initially, he introduced it at a certain level, which would have generated $78 million. What this body did is passed a tobacco tax, and it ended up being $115 million, which, when you do a budget between House and Senate, since we have to do it before the end of the 60th day, we don't know what they might do on the other side. Maybe tomorrow they come figure out a way to raise revenue and so forth. So we have to build our budget that way. So, but I would say this: a structurally sound budget would be one that is funded with ongoing revenue that's pretty approximate to ongoing expenditures. So when the governor sent us up a budget that said, now you got to pass this tax and that tax, and by the way, you've got to take $9 million from highways, and as you know quite well, Senator, that he wanted us to take $21 million from the school aid formula. He wanted us to take money from water projects and gave us all sorts of bills where we had to strip money from services that we've all come to know and rely upon, and then say, and you got to pass taxes on cell phones or the telecommunications tax. And I look at those two taxes, and particularly the tobacco tax, and I say, I hear two things when people are talking about tobacco tax. One is it's for health reasons and people are going to stop smoking. And then the other is, oh boy, we're going to get $115 million. Now, which one is it? Because eventually you would think that if it's to tax something that you want to decline, I don't know if you'd call that a structurally sound revenue measure. In theory, you can't have it both ways, so a structurally sound revenue measure to me is one that's predictable over a long period of time. And I've mentioned on the floor, the structurally sound revenue that we have in our current fiscal life now, there are two of them that are pretty structurally sound. Income tax and sales tax, pretty structurally sound. We can pretty well predict those. And then there are some others along the list. So as he hands us one, now you could say that the tax on telecommunications would have been a good structurally sound decision. So I question whether or not the tobacco tax is. So, and then all these other measures are one-time money that he recommended to us. So to say whether or not he gave us a structurally sound budget doing his revenue measures is a matter of debate. And as you know, we did not do all those revenue measures, those one-time revenue measures, but because of that tobacco tax we did, we were able to project revenue and present to you on the floor today the Senate's actions which fund the governor's budget as he presented it to us and as the agencies all said, quote, they could live with. I hope that answers your question.
Well,
it's a long answer, but
No, I appreciate that. I think that, one could say there are structural changes. I guess the debate where you're coming in on some of those is how stable would they be? You would agree with me that those proposals, although, like you mentioned, the tobacco tax may decrease and may not be as stable, they are not one-time monies. I mean, that's I guess when you say structural changes, it's something that goes forward. The revenues may go up or down in that revenue source, but they're not one-time monies, like coming from a rainy day fund and plugging the budget. It's a structural change where you'll have it on a reoccurring annual basis.
Well,
That's what I'm referring to.
You would be correct. I mean, you could probably argue that if you passed those two taxes and generated, as the governor presented them, about an extra $120 million a year that you could see going forward added to the current tax collections, you'd probably be 80 to 100 million under what you would expect the expenditures to be going forward.
Okay.
Because he filled the rest of it up with basically one-time money.
Right. Okay. So what I understand from your presentation and looking at the budget, and maybe there's others, but there seems to be that the Senate had passed at least, and I think maybe it's only these, but maybe you can correct me, 3 different structural changes as far as revenues.
Yes.
One is the tobacco tax that you mentioned that would raise approximately $115 million. I've seen estimates of $121 million too, but let's just use the number you used. The other was the Greyhound racing. Okay, that was the body, and that was $20 million. Is that correct? And the third was Senate Bill 116 that would increase the video lottery terminals, and that would bring in an additional $4.3 million.
That's correct.
Okay. Are there any other structural revenue sources that we passed that that's built into this proposal that you have in front of us?
All right. Let me comment though on the last two you mentioned. Those would go to the lottery lines. And so we don't count lottery revenue as a general revenue tax source. Sometimes lottery money does fall to the general revenue, but there are numbers of things that are funded by lottery and excess lottery that get first shot at that money. Let's talk about a few of them. The Promise Scholarship, seniors, horse purses, dog purses, tourism, more seniors. There's all kinds of money bought, and the critical thing is to say that those two revenue sources do something structural for general revenue. I kind of question it because you also have to pay off the bond obligations, the $19 million that we put in a few years ago when we had our own stimulus package here and built several things around the state. The ballpark here in Charleston, the Pullman Square in Huntington, and Cabela's, and all of these. Remember we did that? $19 million obligated out of excess lottery. When I was elected here a few years ago, I remember this. First vote I got pressured on was to vote for a bond float to help the Clay Center, and it was started out at $25 million, and it ended up $100 million, Christmas treed by everybody, and we have a $10 million obligation there. Then you've got school bonds to pay. So I don't think that I would add to that list for structurally sound general revenue those lottery enactments, purses and so forth. And if you listen to the horse and dog guys, they'll tell you, and you're from that area, Senator, they tell me that getting rid of all that would cost the general revenue a lot of money because of the 5,000 jobs that would be lost. So it's pretty hard to argue that those two are part of the structural. I'll give you the tobacco tax, but I would, in an argument, not give you the other two. So we're still $80 million short on structural with what we did, even though we're talking about what really didn't finally happen, but in terms of what we did.
Well, but you know, it's the excess lottery, and we use those dollars, and I understand they go into certain areas, but we do use those dollars in funding certain aspects of the budget that can free up monies in the general revenue to fund other things. It's kind of a shell game in the sense that you pay people.
Kind of, but
rob Peter to pay Paul in some of those aspects of those accounts.
But, you know, if you say it's not general revenue money and you got a general revenue budget to balance, I don't have to balance the lottery budget. I just note what it is.
Okay.
But I have to balance the general revenue budget.
All right. So even taking away the Greyhound racing and the increased video lottery, you're saying that those aren't built into this budget here? Those aren't assumed since it passed this body? Are they in
very
this
much
budget?
are. They very much are. The question you asked me was, is that a structurally sound thing to do?
But they are built in this budget.
And knowing that lottery itself has been challenged, I mean, we've seen the lottery receipts go way up and way down and back and forth, and so just like coal severance, these are not. If you're in the business as our guys, as you know, revenue is, and across the country, you can go to these meetings, NCSL or wherever, and hear what are good, stable revenue sources. Some of these are not. Every state that's relying upon the extractive industries is having this problem. I mean, we're having this problem because we had a revenue estimate given to us last year that was $353 million, as it was reported, wrong. It was wrong. The governor gave us a revenue estimate last year that was wrong. Remember that. And why was it wrong? Because he projected revenue from coal and nat gas, and I don't think they did this frivolously or on purpose. We all know who does these revenue estimates. They did not foresee what happened. They foresaw, in my opinion, problems in the out years. They didn't foresee the collapse of that revenue. And that's why we're here now. And I would say a year ago, if you told me the coal severance tax was a structurally sound revenue, and your answer to that question was yes, well, you've been proven wrong in 1 year. And so, and that may be true going forward. So I think there are certain revenues that are structural, and I'm not sure that I would concede the tobacco tax is. I'm not sure about the rest of it.
Okay. So, but I want to be clear. Those three revenue sources are built into this budget proposal that we have in front of us.
Yes, they are.
Okay. And you know that those three revenue sources, is my understanding, did not pass the House.
I absolutely know that very well, sir. Maybe more than most.
Okay. And if you add those three up, that's built in this budget before
Correct.
us, it's approximately around $139.3 million.
Correct.
Okay. So the other aspect, we play this dance game. So we pass our proposal, we go over there. The House takes their proposal, strike and insert in our bill their proposal and send it back. And then we have this dance that goes on in the last 2 days of the session over this very important document. My understanding, and I'm sure you've been in communications with the House and the House Chair, is that the way they're approaching it is that they have $29.7 million coming from their rainy day fund. And also what I understand from you, you made a statement earlier that any additional cuts would be devastating to the agencies because we've had over $200 million of cuts in the last 3 years for our state agencies. And I thought I heard you said any additional cuts.
I did, and that's probably, people can disagree with that particular statement.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with you,
Okay.
but you made that any additional cuts to state agencies because of, I think you said, around $200 million over 3 years, and any additional cuts would be devastating to these agencies. Well, you know, the House is actually looking at taking away funds from agency accounts of $72.8 million, and then additional $10 to $12 million in additional cuts to agencies' budget in order to balance their budget. You're aware of that?
Would you say that again?
So the way they're balancing their budget, the House, and that's going to come back. And
I haven't seen their. I don't know exactly, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's $29.7 million from rainy day fund, $72.8 million in the unexpended funds from the various agency accounts, which I understand from the governor is that these agencies, that's how they run their operations from these accounts. And another $10 million at least in additional cuts to agency budgets. It will be an additional cut from our budget. Our budget doesn't have the cuts on that. They will have additional cuts that you said would be devastating to our agencies, and
Well,
that's the posture.
let me clarify that there are probably certain areas in state government that we would concede probably could be, let me just clarify what I mean by that. Across the board cuts, you know, just going across and cutting without looking could be devastating here and there. There are probably areas in state government where there still is some necessity for them to do well, you know, do better. I read an article the other day by our former colleague from Kanawha County, Senator McCabe, who wrote, and I don't know if it was even in the Journal or somewhere, that, you know, going forward we may be able to do some privatization and do things for less money. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there are not areas that could be cut more, but an overall $100 million cut or whatever, you know, without finding a way to look and see where we've got to go, where what could have in certain areas a devastating effect in the sense of, and then we've got actually, you know, I did not participate in the letter that was written, but there was a letter written to the agencies, and they responded with what would happen if a 6.5% cut occurred to them, and trusting that what was said in these documents is accurate. There are several things in here that I would consider problematic to our citizenry, things that we need to do. Most centrally to me would be in public safety. I mean, I think even you've got your scripture there. It says that, you know, that the thing about government is to protect the pax romana, the common good, to protect us. So, and there are other areas we've come to rely upon that, so in answer to your question, which I've kind of forgotten in all this verbiage, but is that we would, yes, it would be, I think we've seen 20% cuts. We're down in a lot of areas to certain places that we'll hear from people if we do it. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so here's the concern, and don't want to have people's eyes glaze over, but the process.
It's all right.
So we go to conference, and the conference is to try to hold the Senate position, and the House tries to hold the House position. And then you have compromise going back and forth. Theoretically, each proposal is supposed to be legitimate, a reality. I mean, you don't put a proposal up that can't be done, because how could you hold the position of a proposal that really isn't reality? Okay? And so we go to conference, and you just admitted that in our budget we have $139.3 million of this proposal here that doesn't even exist. It's not even reality. It's fictional. We know that. So all of a sudden, how are we going to hold our position on these proposal when this proposal, a portion of this and a vast portion of this of $139.3 million is fictional? Because even if there's no way of doing it. So then all of a sudden we have to go to the House, because their proposal...
Is there a question here?
Yes.
Okay, because
In
I
the sense
kind
of
of know
how
everything
can
you're
you
saying.
defend-
I just want to know what are you.
Well, the question is, how do we defend a Senate position of a proposal that's fictional?
Well, let me answer that question, because it sounds bad to the public that we would put a document out here that was fictional. But so let me explain to the public so they'll know that we were irresponsible in doing this. When you do a budget, and you know, because you've been on finance and you've been in the leadership here before, and you're dealing with your analysts, that you have to pick a date certain where you're going to do your budget. You have to stop. Michael says, I've got to know where I can start doing the budget. You can't wait till day 60 at 11:59 before the clock clicks to know everything that's happening. So tradition has had it, and in actual fact, and this was vetted with both the Revenue Department and a direct meeting I had myself, only me, with the governor, who's been a former finance chairman, who said, Mike, that's the way you have to do it. Now, my hope was, maybe even my prayer was, and maybe it was unanswered, Senator, that the House might generate some revenue. I guess I don't have enough faith or something. But so they didn't. But it's legitimate for us not to create a fictional document, I would say, but a document based upon our actions. Now, the rest of your narrative is accurate. Going forward, when we go over there with an unfunded budget, we know that, and we'll have to deal with whatever revenue and, whatever revenue they try to come up with or whatever, we will be in a pickle. We will be. The governor will lower the revenue estimates, and we'll be where we are. That's all I can say. But, so, fictional is quite an accusatory term. Like, I didn't mean to bring out a fictional document. I didn't mean for this to be one of the greatest, you're holding it there, volumes of fiction ever produced in the history of the world.
It's a good read, Senator. It really is a good read.
Yeah, it's a good read, but it's based upon how the process is done, and I think your narrative is correct, that when we go to conference, unless between now and midnight, Saturday night, something happens, they've got a couple bills in their possession that they could resurrect and bring us a little more revenue to conference. The governor would be willing to sign, and then we'd be happy. But right now, we face a situation. That's all I can say.
Well, Senator, you and I both being pastors, we believe in miracles or we wouldn't be that. So, but I'm not banking on it, and I don't expect it. But the thing that I'm concerned with, and this is no reflection to you, and I understand the process. We've been through that. Although we've had opportunity to amend and update it. My concern is that the Senate proposal, and I want to say that you and the staff have worked very hard, and it is a good document, but there's a large part of it's fictional. It's not real. We can't even stand on our position to try to get the House to recede. So in essence, we're going to be the ones recede because ours is not real. And what is coming over from the House is pretty scary, to tell you the truth, but to a lot of people. I would say even in this chamber, there's a lot of people that's pretty scared about this. And my concern is this proposal doesn't make our posture strong enough to hold because of that deficit of $139.3 million that does not exist, that's written into this narrative of this thing. And I'm just not sure how you are going to approach or how you suggest we approach the negotiations when it comes to that time, because I know you've been in touch with them, and surely you've been talking to them before this time, because, of course, we just don't put a document together on the 58th day of the legislature. It's a process that goes all during the session. So can you shed a light on how we're going to hold our position when our position, a portion of it's fictional?
Shed a light? Can I have your light there for a minute? Well, I think your narrative is somewhat accurate that we're going to be in a weakened position because we have put certain items at a certain level and they've put certain items at a certain level. And I am aware, as obviously you've done some research or talked to some folks, that their budget reflects cuts. It does not reflect 6.5% across the board cuts. It does not. It does reflect targeted cuts. I won't hazard a number, but it's not hundreds of millions. I mean, there are cuts that are there, and we would have to, obviously, as you know how it is in budgeting, although this rule has been violated, but normally when you go to conference, if we've got, say, an agency funded at $100 million or $1 million, and they've got something funded at $800,000, we, in conference, go between the ranges. You know, we might have to drop to theirs or they come to ours. In this case, I think what you're asking me is that are we going to be in a position because of the revenue that the governor may reduce the revenue estimates when we go into this process? Are we going to be in a position where we have to drop back to their position? That may be the case. I hope not, but that may very well be the case. Or we could, use the revenue shortfall reserve fund to fill in some of these differences and hold our position that way in conference.
And I just want to share with you a conversation I had with the governor regarding the revenue shortfall. And in essence, the question is that if the House version, or if a version of this budget that is mostly associated with the House version, if it passes, our bond rating will be downgraded probably immediately in Wall Street, because Wall Street reacts very quickly because of the fact that we are dipping into the rainy day fund. We do not have structural changes. We do not have steady revenue sources coming in. We're rating accounts that are one-time only, patching the work. And all of a sudden, that ripple effect will go through all West Virginia in school building authority, bonding of projects, and everything else. The ripple effect goes just by the passage of that budget and Wall Street reacting to it. Is that your understanding? You've been to Wall Street quite a bit. You've taken many trips up there in the past.
Let me give you a couple. First of all, in your conversation with the governor, was it assumed that he would sign our bill if we gave it to him?
No, I never asked him on that. I mean, I just heard from, in the sense that with the passage of it, it sends an effect. Now, you've been to Wall Street on these things, and what they do is they look at trends and they look at what's happening. And this would send a ripple effect out to the financial markets, and they could react to it quickly.
Is that a question? Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. First of all, I actually was, years ago, when I was in when Underwood was in office, invited to participate in what is now done often by phone, although sometimes by travel, in New York to visit with those people that make these decisions. Now, let me tell you something about them that I learned that day. It was very exciting 2 or 3 days. They're pretty smart, and they kick the tires, and they look below the surface, and they make sure before they downgrade somebody or upgrade somebody that they're not going to react to an immediate event like this. They would probably, if I'm one of those guys up there, they're looking at West Virginia and saying, well, they are an extractive industry state, and they're losing, and their legislative session met, and they didn't do anything about it, but if maybe they can still fix it. Maybe it can, and the reaction would be, I think we looked the other day, what was the bond rating of Moody's? It was AA, 1A. I mean, they took these things. It's been a while since I took the securities exam, but, you got ratings of AAA, AA, single A, B, AA1, all these different ones, and I've forgotten. And then you've got different ones that have their rankings. And I remember after that meeting that year, we went down there. Well, they raised our rating a little bit. They heard what we said and so forth. So you might have to make an argument, but to paint the picture that wholesale devastation is going to occur if our bond rating goes down a tick, because of this, and I doubt that it will, but I don't think they're going to drop us from AA to D. I mean, it can have an effect in the bond market in the sense that all new issues may have to pay a little more interest rate. All currently held secondarily traded bonds, if they're of long maturity, and I'm just going to go ahead and use the language of the securities world, if they're of medium or long maturity, could have an effect on their valuation if you had to sell them before maturity. But if they're short duration, they're probably safe. So, but to say that, to try to make a point that there is an effect in that direction, I would concede with you that we'd like to not see that happen. I would not go as far as to say that the world is coming to an end and we could remedy it, and they would probably understand it looking at us, and they know I was surprised how well they knew us well. I mean, One of the ladies up there brought up a bond default that occurred with turnpike bonds back in the 50s. It says it's still in the file. So they know us well, and I'm not so certain that we would get an immediate reaction, although we might. But, you know, we still have the rest of this fiscal year, if we had to hopefully fix this problem, and that won't happen.
Well, I'm assuming, and I'm
Without
sure,
assuming the governor's going to veto our budget.
well, I'm assuming, and I'm sure I know the governor and probably his people are constantly in contact with the financial market people, so they would have a handle on this. But for those who are, you know, maybe not as familiar with bonding and on this, what happens with our rating drops, and I want to ask you this question, if I'm right about this, when the rate of the bonds start dropping, that actually it costs more because interest rates, or the interest rates goes up on paying off bonds. Is that correct?
All right.
Yeah, give us the scenario.
All right, here's the scenario. A bond is not like going to the bank. You know, it's a bond. When you do a bond float, basically the guys that issue the bonds, and I'm always amazed at this, but, you know, we did tobacco bonds a few years ago. The marketplace, the world around there bought our tobacco bonds, $800 million worth. What happens is that the bond buyers will look at the underlying payer, the revenue source. In this case, let's say we're doing a school bond, or let's say we're doing a road bond, like we're talking about. The bond buyers would then say, well, first of all, it's tax-free bond, so we're going to get less interest rate, and then they would question in their minds whether or not the state of West Virginia would have the capacity to pay them back. Now, over the years, we've not defaulted on anything. So the sophisticated bond buyer might look at that and say, well, hey, I'm getting a good yield here for something that I know I'm going to get my money back. But if it's the good faith and credit of the state of West Virginia, it'd be better if our credit rating was higher, but it's a market-established rate at that time. And you know, for example, a few years ago, we talked about a road in my area about selling bonds because the overall marketplace had driven municipal bond rates to the floor. And there was an attempt to try to sell those bonds in November of that year in order to raise enough money, because the lower the rate, the more money you can borrow based on the revenue you're bringing to the deal. But in 2 months' time, the marketplace, not the credit rating of the state, drove the interest rates up about 1%. So that if they would have gone to the market in November, they'd have gotten 2% deal, and I'm just, you know, guessing at the numbers. But waiting till February because of market conditions, it went to 3%. So it's not only our credit worthiness, but it's also where that particular market is and what the world is willing to pay for. There are all sorts of economic factors that affect the interest rate you're going to get.
So is it safe to say, if the bond ratings drops because of this budget, that it will cost more to build the same? It will cost, what would it build a school or a road or whatever? When you do it on bonding, it would end up costing that entity more money than if the rating was higher. Is that
It's
true?
not necessarily safe to say that, but if the bond rating would drop dramatically, yes. If the bond rating would drop very incrementally, and then, you know, there are 3 agencies and maybe one drops and one doesn't. But and the fact that this state, for example, and the governor knows this, and that the New York bond rating agencies look at us very favorably for some things that we've done here that other states have not done. And let me tell you what they are. When we faced years ago a devastating unfunded teachers' retirement system, when it was finally actuarially discovered after years of not looking, and you go back to the Caperton years and a little earlier, and they said, we better take a look at this. The state of West Virginia set up a 40-year payment schedule to pay off a $4 billion liability. Now, that, if you look in our budget right now, we're still paying that. and it's at $400 million a year this year out of a $4.3 billion budget. It's been a 10% payment. You know, Wall Street looks at that and says, this state for 24 or 25 years, even in budget crisis, has not done what other states have done. Governor Christie this year, $3.5 billion, he reduced it to $2 billion to pay on the pensions in the state of New Jersey to balance his budget. I suggested, but have pulled back on the position, that you could, without impunity, I mean, do that here and refinance that long-term debt. You know, but I kind of don't think so. This budget does not do that. Wall Street would look at that very favorably when we dealt with our OPEB problem and when we dealt with our workers' comp problem, and you know we're coming to an end of having to pay off that debt. They just don't look at a budget problem for 1 year. They look at how responsibly you've acted across the spectrum of things that are of interest to them. And so I can't imagine that if we have one budget for one short period of time that's unfunded or funded dipping into the rainy day fund to a certain level, which, by the way, we still have one and other states for a period of time did not, then I just can't imagine that our bond rating was going to suffer that much and the whole thing collapse. But I know where you're headed. It's like we need a structurally sound budget. And I just simply say that I'd love to see that too, and I think at a certain point we're going to have the whole building is, and I think it will, have to man up one of these days and decide on revenue and expenses and getting them in line.
But you would agree that this is not a structurally sound budget?
Well, I don't know what you mean by that. I mean,
well, you just said someday we need a structurally sound budget, and I'm just saying you would agree that this is not that budget.
I would agree that it does not, at this point, without having, well, first of all, a structurally sound budget to me would have been if the governor would have said, here's your expenditures and here's your revenues, and you don't have to pass any other bills. When we get to that point, we have a structurally sound budget. Right now, I don't know if you say about the budget, but structurally sound in terms of our finances going forward, that budget is not, you're right, that budget is not in the sense of being fully funded by revenue, but I wasn't handed one that was fully funded by revenue. I was handed one that was funded by passing bills and raising taxes in order to say now we're on a structurally sound basis financially in West Virginia. I probably have been handed one of the worst financial problems. And the Senate, now let's be direct here, the Senate passed revenue measures that would have balanced this budget, but it did not bring our revenue projections to the level going forward even with this. It gets you close, but it doesn't get you to, say, funding the types of services and expenditures that our people have come to expect that are funded in this budget.
Thank you, Senator.
You're welcome.
Mr. President, not having of course, this is a no lack of respect for the finance chair and the hard work he's gotten, but I'm going to vote against this budget, and for many of the things that was actually talked about here. First of all, it was admitted that this is not a structurally sound budget. And I'm not sure, I would have thought that we could get there this year, but maybe factors didn't allow that to happen. And as far as me going back to my constituents and facing them and being fiscally responsible, I'm not going to be put in a position to vote for a budget that's not structurally sound. The other thing, Mr. President, I'm going to say is I'm not into the business of voting for fiction. This is real life. These are real people this is going to affect. And it's definitely $139.3 million in this budget is pure fiction. Does not exist unless there's a heck of a miracle that occurs, which I don't think it's going to happen in 2 days. And so therefore, I'm going to vote no on this budget. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? See, Senator from Morgan.
Will the senator from Berkeley yield?
Will the senior senator from the 16th yield? Senator yields.
To my good friend from Berkeley County, do you think it was, you used the word fiscally irresponsible. Do you think it was fiscally irresponsible for the governor of this state to send us a revenue number based on laws and taxes that don't exist?
I think the governors in the past that I've been down here, Senator, and I've been down here since Governor Underwood, and all the governors that I've served in this body with have sent budgets up with certain legislation that accompanies that budget.
But you used the word fiction. It is fiction, isn't it? It was fiction when it arrived here from the executive, wasn't it?
At that time, it had the opportunity to actually happen.
It still has
right?
the opportunity to happen now, doesn't it?
How realistic is that?
The House could pass a bill.
Senator, you know the process as well as I do, and you know that's not going to happen. Let me share with you the tobacco tax, okay? And this is what's happened here. The tobacco tax was, as you know, Senator, and I think that with the Democratic caucus and the Senator from Marion offering up $1 a pack, which raised that revenue in Senate Bill 420, it passed out of this chamber 26-6 votes. It went over to the House, and it died in the House Finance Committee, 21-3. Died in the House Finance. It's not even on the floor. You need 3 readings in order for a bill to pass, and it's not even out of the Finance Committee. It's been rejected. Now, even if they come back, reconsider, and do all that, that's a heck of a marathon, but that one's not going to happen.
Well,
the other bill, let me finish if you
Please
want me
go
to
ahead.
answer the question here. The other bill that I understand of Senate Bill 116, that's going to be $4.3 million. That's the increase of limited video lottery. It passed out here with a lot of support, and it's still on House Judiciary Committee. It hasn't even been brought up again. And my understanding is that the committees are shutting down over there, so I can't see that. Today is the last day for a bill to be taken up for immediate consideration and read. So we know, and the finance chair, Senator, just admitted that he knew those 3 revenue sources were dead. He just admitted. He knew it was dead. Everybody knew it was dead. So when the governor introduces his package at the beginning of the session of day 1 of 60, there's a lot of time for that to happen. And if it doesn't happen, then it's on us to balance the budget. If we don't pass something, we balance the budget. We have to find the revenue source. But we all know that the revenue sources that are built into this budget, $139 million, is not a reality. It's fictional.
Well,
and that's fiscally irresponsible.
Let me just say again, you will concede then, will you not, that the governor sent up to this legislature a revenue estimate for fiscal year 16-17 based on revenues that were neither enacted into law or taxes that were not in place. And in that regard, the revenue estimate came from the executive. Do you agree with that?
I would agree that that's the case, and that's happened with all other executives. Yes, sir.
But you would not call that fiction?
I would say at that point it was hopeful.
Hope and aspiration, but not fact, right? Not something that had happened.
It could have been fact that this body had acted on it, yes, sir. And it was under the anticipation that this body would act, and if they didn't act on those, then we'd have to find revenue sources. But to put forward a budget, now we're talking about the 58th day. We have 2 days left. We have before us a proposal that we're going to negotiate with the House, knowing full well that a large portion of this is fictional. And we can't even stand on our position because it doesn't even exist.
Our position would be the revenue estimate provided by the executive that we built into our budget. Isn't that the basis of our position?
I don't understand what you're talking about. Yes, we build. He gives a revenue estimate of what we're going to bring in. That's what we have to stick to, and we got to find the money. We got to look at budgeting that money where the revenues are going to come from.
And you're decrying the Senate budget as a work of fiction because it's built on the revenue estimate given to us by the executive. Is that right?
No, sir. You know what my issue is? My issue is not the revenue sources that the governor gave us or proposals. My issues is the inability of this body, of the legislature, and maybe not the Senate, but the West Virginia legislature not acting. Not doing the most responsible thing of getting our money to our roads, fully funding PEIA, making sure we don't have cuts that are going to be, as the finance chairman says, devastating to our state agencies. I'll tell you what upsets me is the inability of this body, as the West Virginia legislature, to act. That's what leadership is. Well, the governor proposes, we actually take it up and we try to make it happen, and we failed.
And you concede, do you not, that this body, this chamber of the legislature, passed the revenue measures, or a great many of them, recommended by the governor?
We passed a lot of them. Matter of fact, we didn't pass some, because of the increase. But I'll tell you what we did. We have a proposal here in front of us that's not realistic. It's fictional. $139 million is not in. We don't have that, and it actually says it's here. Are we going to vote on $139 million that doesn't exist? And that's what we're doing right now, is a proposal that basically is a great work of fiction with that amount of money that's not even realistic, and it'll never happen this session because of the inability of the West Virginia legislature not to act. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senior Senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I want to stand up here and actually commend the Chairman of Finance, commend the staff of the Finance Committee, and commend this great body over here, the Senate of the West Virginia Legislature. You know, standing here and hearing that we didn't act when we made some very tough votes this session over on this side is just, you know, almost a slap in the face of the work that we did here in this body of the Senate. We passed a tobacco tax out of the Senate, which was not an easy vote. It's not easy to raise taxes on West Virginians. We have gone through the budget. We have just passed out of the Finance Committee a measure dealing with a modernization fund, which was heavily scrutinized, which was done on a party line vote to be able to get $9 million more towards the budget. It was a tough cut. It was a tough consideration, but we had to act. And act we did, Mr. President. We're continuing to do what we can for the budget. Talking about PEIA, in this and the House budget, PEIA is fully funded. In both budgets it is. And I understand that the House did not take up a lot of the measures that we would like them to have taken up, but that's how the legislative process works. All we can do in the Senate, all that we can do and all that we ever have done, no matter who's been in charge, no matter who's been the finance chair, no matter who's been the governor, is set a budget based on the actions that we have completed here in this body, up to a certain date and point in time. If those actions aren't acted on beyond us, beyond this chamber, there's not really much we can do about that. But per what the chairman has said, and per what chairmen of the past have done, there is a cutoff date. And then after that, we have to go with the measures that we as a body have passed and set together a budget. Because you can't put together a budget on the 58th, 59th day. Now, I understand the governor's extended the session and probably will be looking at other sessions in the future before this year is out to figure out where to go from here. But, Mr. President, we are in the worst fiscal situation as a state in a very, very long time, and we didn't get there overnight. Measures were not passed in the past to help take care of the 6-year forecast that has been before this legislature and legislators before us. Matter of fact, measures that were passed, like increasing DMVPs in the past, were even vetoed in the past. So there have been measures that have been done to try to have some foresight that did not move forward. But I do want to commend this body, both sides of the aisle, because you all, this side, the Democrats, Republicans, worked together over here, have made tough votes, funded roads. We have made tough votes to fix the budget. We have made tough votes to fix and fund PEIA, and we have to work off of what we did. Because at a certain point, you have to stop, put together a budget, and I think under your leadership, Mr. President, the Senate has done a very good job. Thank you, Mr. President.
The Senator from Upshur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the gentleman from Berkeley yield?
Senior Senator from the 16th yield.
Feel like I'm the finance chair. Yes, sir.
Senator
Well, thank you. I'm kind of curious because I'm not on finance, and we've worked from pretty early in the morning till pretty late at night in judiciary, and I have to admit that as it relates to the budget, my depth of knowledge is not particularly deep, and I also have to say that just from what I've heard here as part of this discussion, you clearly have a fairly deep knowledge of not only what has occurred in our finance committee, but even the workings that have gone on over in the House side, and I commend you for having acquired this knowledge, and clearly you've put a lot of time and effort into it, but it raises a question for me, because if you've paid attention, you've seen that I haven't voted for some of these revenue measures that have been here, because I'm generally opposed to that type of thing. At the same time, I have to wonder, given your depth of knowledge on it, I assume that you have put together an alternative plan to what has been put forth by the Finance Committee for the budget. I mean, you're not up here just criticizing. You've got an idea yourself of how this can be put together in a way that resolves the questions that you've raised?
Well, Senator, I think that if the House acted on the various bills that actually passed the Senate, then this proposal would no longer be fictional. It would be reality, and that this would probably be close to what we could work with. But because it's evident that the House is not going to pass those revenue sources, and this document, this proposal still has it built in, that makes this a fictional document, and what I'm saying I'm voting against is a document of fiction.
Right, and I guess what I'm wondering is, because my experience even from judiciary has been that the House is where my bills get sent to die.
Well,
that there doesn't seem to be any reason to think that what we passed out of this body would have been met with anything other than the death it met with over there. And so I'm simply asking, knowing that this wasn't going to happen, and having the insight and clearly a very great depth of knowledge of what has occurred in the Finance Committee, you've had an opportunity that I haven't had, and many members on both sides of the aisle haven't had, to consider the likely events of what would occur in the House. And so have you prepared for that, knowing that that was going to occur, or being fairly sure that it was going to occur? Have you prepared an alternative proposal, a solution? And if so, why wasn't such a solution proposed yesterday when we were on second reading, and such a thing could have been considered by this body?
Well, Senator, I don't have all the knowledge, okay, and I'll be the first to admit to you in a humble way. But I'll tell you this, I do know that the Senate Democratic Caucus has a plan, and we implemented that plan. The first thing we did is we raised the tobacco tax and was able to get the revenues that we needed, and you all went along with that amendment. And it was a bipartisan approach. Now, you may have voted against it, I don't remember.
I did. Yes.
Okay, so it went over. The second thing we did is people cry out for the roads. We need roads. Now that the warm weather's coming and the potholes are just springing up, and I'm sure the senator from Jefferson can tell you how many potholes are in the radius of a couple hundred miles from here. But I'm going to tell you what happened there is the senator from Wayne actually offered up on behalf of the Democratic caucus a proposal that with bipartisan support we supported in order to fund our roads. That's a reality. Now, when it goes over there, I can't say what's happening. But what we have in front of us today, okay, even though we put forward these plans, these ideas, all during the 60 days here, it wasn't acted on. But all I can tell you, the only thing I'm voting on right now is what's up on that board. Senate Bill 269, which is this document right here that has a fictional amount built into it of $139.3 million that does not exist.
But I
Does
agree
not
with that
exist. So I'm not
part
going to
of
vote
that.
for this because it's a good piece of fiction that is not responsible. I want to vote on something real, and that's what that is. And the budget is real to the people of West Virginia, and that's why I'm on my position. Senator, I'm not asking you to vote one way or another. I'm just stating my convictions and what I believe to be the most important thing.
I can appreciate that. And I guess my question most fundamentally is, knowing that it wasn't going to work, knowing that the cigarette tax died in the House, I believe, I'm not quite sure, but more than a week and a half ago, you even know the vote total of how it died in finance. You've known for some time that that wasn't going to occur, and yet yesterday an alternative could have been proposed, and it wasn't proposed. And rather than voting for or against this, and I can understand wanting to vote against it, at the same time it seems incumbent upon you to have at least tried to present an alternative proposal that was based on reality, knowing that tax had died. And I appreciate you answering my questions, and I look forward to hearing the rest of this discussion.
Well, Senator, you make an excellent point. That cigarette tax died, you said, about a week and a half ago. We all knew it. I mean, it was well reported in the papers. And here we are with a proposal that doesn't even reflect the death of that. It says it's still alive. And we all know that's fictional. So you're exactly right. We knew a week and a half ago it was dead, but it's still here today. And Senator, you know, on the second reading yesterday, it could have been amended. It was discussed. It was brought forward, but it wasn't. But now this is where we are. So you're exactly right. Thank you.
Senator from Wayne.
Senior Senator from 8th Yield.
The senior senator from the 8th Yield.
Senator, let's make sure we get our facts straight on the Modernization Fund. The motion that you're talking about that was defeated was the motion by the senator from Ohio. The bill went out on a voice vote.
No, the bill went out on a roll call vote.
No, it did not. Check your facts.
I'd have to get an attorney to come down, but I remember it being a roll call vote on the bill. And
The roll call vote was on the amendment by the senator from Ohio, and that was the roll call vote.
I think the amendments were ruled not germane, and then the roll call vote was on the
No,
final
Senator,
bill.
you better check your facts. The actual facts are, now I'm talking to you, you're the one that made the statement.
Yes, sir, I did.
And the statement was that the Senate Democrats did not vote for the Modernization Fund.
Yes, sir, that was my statement.
There was an amendment from the senator from Ohio. It was not ruled not germane. We did a roll call vote on that, and it was defeated by us voting against it.
Right.
And I did vote with the senator from Ohio. But when it was reported out with the bill, it was a roll call vote. Just check your facts.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I thought it was on the bill, and I did not think it was on the amendment, my friend. And
Senator from Wayne.
so
I moved the previous question.
Senator from Wayne moves previous question. All in favor will say aye. Opposed?
Move to previous question cuts off debate on the bill, which is the budget bill, Senate Bill 269.
Chairs in doubt. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Opinion of the chair, the noes. Senator from Wayne demands division. All those in favor will please stand.
And everybody in favor of cutting off debate will stand, and they'll count heads, and then everybody who is opposed will be counted.
Those opposed, please stand. Vote being 16 in favor, 18 opposed, less than a majority having voted in the affirmative, declare the motion rejected. Senior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand to offer closing remarks on the bill.
Senator from the 4th.
First of all, we just checked with the it's up to you.
Senator from Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I came in this body with integrity. I'm going to leave this body with integrity. If you challenge something, you need to back that challenge up. And you can sit here and say whatever you want to. I was there. I heard what I heard. But I will also tell you this. I'm going to vote for this because this is a process that we have. This bill does have the things that the Senate passed. I'm not going to play games. I'm not going to do anything. I don't like games being played with me either. And we can sit there and not do something by all this partisan crap that we've been doing. But I've had it up to here on some of these things. It's time for us to move these things on. It's time for us to quit this little bickering on some things. And it's time for us to vote on some stuff. But I will not sit here and listen to some of the things I'm listening to when somebody says, well, the Democrats do this. Look, what we had yesterday was shameful. We should not have that again. It's time for us to do our work here, move on. You can vote against previous question all you want. The last one, Mr. President, I'll ever do here this year. But don't start telling me that this is sound, that's not sound. The bottom line is what we're sending out of here has flaws in it. They all the time has flaws in it. Don't blame it on the governor. The governor presents things up here. They all have done it. I've been here with a number of them, and they have all put up budgets that have revenue estimates, whether you take them or not. Gas taxes, all kinds of things that have been up here. But to start saying, well, we voted this in and the modernization fund didn't do this. The budget bill we have here now is sound from the process that we had in the Senate. Now, I guarantee you what we get back, most likely will guarantee you, that it will not be sound coming back. But for the vote here, this is a sound vote on what we passed, which was a tobacco tax that did make a budget much more sound. Thank you.
Senator from Marion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate. You know, I know how difficult it is to put a budget together, and it takes a lot of people with a lot of coordination. It takes your staff on a daily basis to work countless hours to put this thing together. And this thing wasn't done last night or this morning. It was done through the course of the year. You know, we could look at the budget from the very first day and then make adjustments accordingly. You know, I commend the chairman of finance. He had a very difficult job, and the staff did too. I am concerned as we send this budget over, because the senator from Berkeley is absolutely right. There are things in our budget that are not reflected in the House budget. And when we get into the conferees, I'm concerned that their revenue estimates are not exactly what ours are. So therefore, are we going to use the least common denominator and have to settle for the House budget that I think makes some draconian cuts? You know, we've got a lot of work to do yet. I would suggest that, you know, both sides of the aisle try to cooperate and get this thing in a position that we can walk out of here and everybody's a winner. The bickering back and forth is certainly horrendous, and there's enough blame for both sides. You know, I knew several years ago, and I stood on this floor and made several speeches that, you know, we're hitting into really tough times. We knew that the coal industry was on the decline. You didn't have to have a magic ball to look at to see that. All the indicators and all the analysts suggested that we were going to be in this situation. What we didn't realize is that the gas industry was going to take a dip the way it did, and the price of gas would certainly be as low as it is. We knew that it wouldn't the price of gas and the gas industry wouldn't supplant the numbers that we were getting from coal, but we thought we could work with it and, you know, come out with at least some semblance of a balanced budget. So at this time, you know, when we get into the budget process, and I assume next week we'll appoint the conferees and we'll work together, but I am seriously, Mr. President, concerned that as we send this budget over, and we know that there are things here that the House did not take up for whatever reason, and we can't second guess what the House did, and you know, I'm certain that they have their reason. But I would hope that when we get into this process, and I don't know if it's going to work or not. We've never been in this situation before. Generally, when we pass a budget to the other side in the years that I've had experience with, we were close, and we would look at certain budget line items and make decisions accordingly, and generally come to a compromise and come out with we'd give and take. It was a give and take process. I don't know if there's any give and take in this budget. The numbers are not going to add up. I don't know whether we pass a bogus budget and the governor will veto it and we'll come back and start all over again. Maybe he'll readjust his revenue estimates and bring them down. You know, there's a lot of questions out there of what's going to happen. We don't have the answers, and certainly I don't think anybody in this body does. But I would say let attitudes sort of temper out, and let's work together and get the job done.
Further discussion? Now I'll recognize the senior senator from the 4th to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple remarks to some things that have been said. One in particular. It was said that I knew a week and a half ago that the tobacco tax was dead. But what I also knew a week and a half ago is there was a 1% sales tax alive. And I went over to the House and tried to talk to them about that. I even went as far as to publicly talk about that in interviews. Got asked by a lobbyist, are we going to have a 1% sales tax? And I would usually respond and say, that would be a structurally sound solution to our budget. It's in the possession of the House. So to report to my members of the Senate, fully aware that the tobacco tax was dead, that tax was not. So I just want to be perfectly clear, having been said on the floor that, oh, I just brought a budget out that's fiction, full well knowing that, you know, and it was an amendable document. But here's the trouble, Mr. President. The only way you could amend that document was to bring out the cuts. That's what you'd have to do. You'd have to go in and cut about $130 million worth of money out of the budget. Now, I got the document right here that says this is what $130 million will cost you. And it is the response of all the agencies. So rather than frighten people and do that, I could have come out and, hey, well, here's the amendments right here. We're not going to get into tobacco tax. So I held out the possibility, though it didn't happen. Maybe it was an unrealistic possibility, but I will say this. It was considered for a while, but then they could not garner the vote. So I just wanted to be clear to the public that what we did here was operate as we've always done, as the Speaker, I still call him the Speaker, but the Revenue Secretary Kiss and Governor said that's the way you have to do the budget. So, Mr. President, just to clarify those few things, I do recommend, and I recognize the problems we got ahead of us, but I do recommend that you vote for the budget.
Question for the Senate, shall the bill pass? All those in favor vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk close the machine, ascertain the results. On this question, 29 yeas, 5 nays, 0 absent, not voting. More than a majority of those voting and present voting having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed.